It was 2017, a cold, silent night in a suburb of Denver, Colorado. The streets were nearly deserted, and the only sound was the distant hum of a flickering streetlight in front of 41 Maplewood Street. A modern house, packed with sensors, electronic locks and cameras in every corner, like a digital fortress. There lived Evelyn Marsh, a woman who believed technology could protect her from anything. A systems engineer, methodical, reserved, and known to her neighbors as the camera lady. Hardly anyone saw her outside her home, but she was impossible not to notice. Her lights came on at precise times, her curtains closed automatically at 8 o'clock, and any movement on the sidewalk caused one of the cameras to discreetly turn toward the street. That night, something broke the pattern. At 10:47 p.m., a neighbor, Mr. Howard, heard a strange sound, something between a muffled scream and a loud crash. He hesitated for a few seconds before leaving. He knocked on the door, called Evelyn's name, but all he heard was the echo of his own racing heart. He called the police to say something was wrong. When the officers arrived, they found the front door unlocked, which was absurd enough for anyone who knew Evelyn. The woman who never left anything vulnerable now lay on the living room floor, motionless, pale, with a frozen look that seemed still trying to understand what had happened. There was no sign of a break-in, a struggle, or an invasion. The place was in perfect order, almost. Too clean. But the real terror began when one of the officers, trying to access the security system, noticed that the cameras were inactive. All of them. No recording of the night, not a single fragment of video. It was as if time had been erased inside that house. The cables were intact, the devices were working, but there was nothing recorded. No backups, no history, nothing. Evelyn had a local server with automatic cloud storage, and not even the forensic technicians were able to recover a single file. Everything was gone. The lights flickered intermittently as if the house was still breathing, but silent, complicit. The entire neighborhood stayed awake that night, watching the patrol cars come and go, trying to understand how something so strange could happen to someone who lived surrounded by cameras. And perhaps the most disturbing thing was this: if not even Evelyn, with all her technological paranoia, could escape, what else could be behind that digital silence? Why would someone erase everything, every second, every image? And most importantly, why would they have left the body there, exposed, as if they wanted it to be found? Stories like these move us in a way that's hard to explain, right? Because deep down, those who follow these kinds of cases aren't here just out of curiosity, but because of the truth that was hidden, the questions no one dared to ask, and the answers that time tried to erase. And when we talk about disappearances, lives cut short, and mysteries that defy even logic, you can't just listen and stay the same. You feel the weight, the doubt, the desire to understand what really happened. That's why this community exists. People who truly feel, who revel in every twist and turn, who don't let the story die. Here, each story is told as it deserves to be told, with emotion, respect, and the intensity that truth carries. So come be a part of this with me. Press the button, subscribe, leave the like now, and help keep alive this chain of people who believe that every story needs one day to be told the right way. Evelyn Marsh wasn't the type to leave loose ends. From a young age, she learned that control was the only way to survive in a world that rarely offered security. The only child of a military father and a mother who suffered from anxiety, Evelyn grew up surrounded by rules, schedules, and rigid routines. Perhaps that's why she found a kind of refuge in technology, a space where everything could be predicted, calculated, and protected. Those who knew her in college said she was the kind of woman who spoke little, but observed everything. She had a steady gaze, the kind that seemed to register every detail before she even reacted. And it was this methodical mind that led her to become one of the most promising engineers at a digital security company called Technova, specializing in home surveillance systems. For years, Evelyn dedicated her life to protecting others. Ironic, isn't it? She spent sleepless nights, creating protocols to prevent intrusions, track threats, and block unwanted access. But deep down, no one knew how much she herself was a prisoner of fear. It all started after her divorce from Michael, a financial analyst with whom she lived for 5 years. The relationship ended acrimoniously, full of accusations and distrust. Evelyn claimed he had searched her files, accessed her emails, and installed spyware on her computer. Michael denied it, of course, but her closest friends said that, from then on, Evelyn began to isolate herself. First, she deactivated social media, then changed her number, moved address, and began living alone. The house on Maplewood Street was her attempt at a fresh start, a space where no one could watch her, or at least that's what she believed. The neighborhood saw Evelyn as a reserved, almost mysterious woman. She rarely welcomed visitors and spoke with minimal words. The mailman said she always used the same phrase, "Leave it there, I'll monitor." Everything through the cameras. And it wasn't an exaggeration. The house was a maze of surveillance. It had motion sensors, electronic locks, night vision cameras, and a private server stored in a locked room, like a safe. It was the exact reflection of Evelyn's mind. Logical, controlled, inaccessible. But there was something strange about this obsession. Some neighbors commented that she stayed up late, pacing from room to room, checking monitors and adjusting settings. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, the lights inside would all come on at once. It seemed she was running from something invisible, something no one but her could see. Co-workers noticed that Evelyn was different in the last few months before her death. More tense, more suspicious. She spoke little in meetings, avoided going out to lunch with the group, and responded to messages coldly and directly. Once, during a project presentation, one of the directors questioned her about a flaw in the video storage software, and she reacted strangely. She turned pale, gathered up her papers, and left the room. After that, she began working from home. Some say she had discovered something serious within the company, but no one knew for sure. There was one curious detail. 2 weeks before the crime, Evelyn tried to file an anonymous complaint about misuse of sensitive data by Technova employees. The complaint was never processed. Those closest to her reported that Evelyn lived with the constant feeling of being watched. A former colleague said that in one of the few meetings they had after her dismissal, Evelyn stared at the cafe window and asked if she too felt like someone was watching her. "It's not paranoia," she said. "It's just a matter of time before they realize I know too much." These words, which sounded confusing that day, became even more unsettling after news of her death spread. Despite her reserved demeanor, Evelyn wasn't a fragile woman. She was intelligent, meticulous, and rational to a fault. She used to write down everything, keep copies of emails, log calls, and document every project she worked on. But something in her final months deviated from the norm. Her notes became shorter, her passwords more complex, and her routine more unpredictable. There were days when she wouldn't turn on her computer, and others when she sent dozens of messages in a row, almost as if she were trying to resolve something urgent. Neighbors said that shortly before her death, she spent 2 entire days indoors without leaving the house, ordering food through an app, and turning off the intercom whenever anyone approached. Evelyn seemed to live on constant alert, and somehow all of this was reflected in the small details of the house. She had installed a one-way mirror in the living room, which actually hid a micro-surveillance camera. The bedroom light switch was a sort of panic button, connected directly to an emergency line. Even the ambient sound was controlled, low. Music during the day, absolute silence at night. It wasn't just security, it was surveillance, and the scariest thing is that everything indicated she truly believed she was in danger, even without concrete evidence that anyone was threatening her. After her death, police found an encrypted folder on her computer labeled Spectre. No one was able to open the contents, and technicians claimed the encryption was virtually unbreakable. This raised a question that no one has been able to answer to this day. Did she create this folder to protect herself from someone, or to hide something she discovered? Those who knew Evelyn say she had a sweet side, but she was deeply lonely. She enjoyed black coffee, war documentaries, and would spend hours reading about unsolved crimes. Perhaps because deep down she identified with the victims, all of them trying to survive in silence. Some say that days before her death, she told a friend that she was building a dossier on privacy invasions, something that could destroy entire careers. But no one knows whether this dossier actually existed, or whether it was just another desperate measure taken by a woman who no longer knew who to trust. What's most intriguing is that Evelyn wasn't the type to make mistakes. And yet, on that September night, something went wrong. The woman who created systems to predict any break-in ended up the victim of something even she couldn't anticipate. Some believe she'd been under surveillance for a long time, and that somehow the killer used her own security system against her. Others believe Evelyn deliberately provoked it, as if to leave a trail, a hidden clue for anyone who knew how to look. The fact is, nothing about that story made sense. No cameras recorded anyone entering. No alarms went off. No signs of a struggle. Just a perfect, clean, intact house. And a dead woman on the living room floor. And perhaps most disturbing of all is the thought that Evelyn saw this coming. Because a week earlier she wrote on a piece of paper that police found in her desk, "If I disappear, don't look for the culprit where everyone is looking. He's inside." This phrase was never explained, but it completely changed the course of the investigation. After all, what did she mean by "he's inside"? Inside where? The house? The company? Or something much closer than anyone imagined? That same night, Evelyn's body was found. Detective Rachel Collins was called to the scene. She was the kind of investigator who wasn't easily impressed. 15 years in the cyber homicide division had already exposed her to everything. Hackers who faked suicides, criminals who left false trails, disappearances that turned into digital labyrinths. But there was something about that house that bothered her in a different way. It was too clean, too calculated. Every inch seemed designed to tell a story, or hide one. Rachel walked slowly through the rooms, taking in the details. The coffee still warm on the table, the computer running with the screen locked, the cameras pointed at strategic locations but with no recordings. It was as if someone had erased time inside that house. She analyzed the initial reports and noticed something no one else had. The data hadn't simply been deleted. It had been purposefully overwritten with a binary noise pattern used by professionals, a type of digital cleaning that only a highly experienced person could perform. And the strangest thing was that the system had been accessed from within the local network. In other words, it wasn't an external intrusion. Whoever had deleted the images was right there in Evelyn's house. This awakened in Rachel something she called the unease, an instinct that arose whenever something didn't fit. Over the next few days, Rachel delved into Evelyn's information and discovered something even more disturbing. This wasn't an isolated case. There had been 3 similar deaths in the past 2 years, all in different states but with the same pattern: female victims, all with technology backgrounds, all with advanced security systems, and all with their recordings erased. No suspects, no evidence. Local police treated each of these deaths as isolated cases, home accidents, electrical failures, even suicides. But Rachel saw the pattern clearly. Someone was turning safe houses into traps. She took the theory to her superiors, but was met with cold stares and canned phrases. Coincidence, they said. We can't create a conspiracy without concrete evidence. To them, Evelyn was just another victim of a botched crime. But Rachel couldn't accept that answer. Something inside her told her there was a mind controlling all of this. An invisible predator, one that knew how to enter, observe, and disappear without a trace. And the more she read the reports, the more she realized that the digital signature of the system failures was the same type of code inserted, the same date and time pattern, like a stamp. Rachel began combing through old files, even against orders. She spent entire nights reviewing cybercrime reports, cross-referencing victims' names, consulting retired experts, until a pattern began to form before her eyes, a cluster of accesses originating from a single international server, registered under a name that sounded almost symbolic. Spectre, no country, no company, just a rotating IP address used in various parts of the world. It was as if the person in charge wanted to be a ghost. But the strangest thing was realizing Evelyn already knew. In an email retrieved from the backup provider, Rachel found a never-sent message addressed to a former Technova colleague. The content was short, but devastating. Therein, it's not a failure, it's observation. Every house, every camera, we are the tests. This email, dated a week before the death, completely changed the course of the investigation. Evelyn not only suspected she was being watched, she knew who was behind it. From that moment on, Rachel began to see the case differently. It wasn't just about murder, it was about control, how someone could turn fear into a tool. And the deeper she delved into the data, the more she discovered that the connections went far beyond Evelyn. All of the dead women had, at some point, worked on projects linked to Technova. All had exposed privacy breaches in the surveillance systems. All had disappeared under circumstances where the cameras, curiously, stopped working. The detective began to suspect that Technova was hiding something big. The company was known for selling hack-proof systems, but the evidence suggested otherwise. The flaws seemed programmed, as if someone within the company had created a sort of secret backdoor, a shortcut that allowed full access to customers' home systems. Rachel knew that if she was right, she was dealing with something much bigger than she'd imagined, and at that point, she too began to feel the weight of the invisible gaze. Because suddenly her own patrol car developed GPS failures. Her cell phone froze for seconds when she tried to send reports, and some files mysteriously disappeared from her laptop. She tried to notify the department, but her boss told her to take a few days off. They said she was becoming obsessed, seeing patterns where there were none, but Rachel wasn't the kind of person to give up easily. And if there was one thing she'd learned in her years of service, it was that when the system tries to silence someone, it's because the truth is too close. So she took matters into her own hands. She revisited the victims' homes, spoke with family members, gathered photos, and noticed a detail that chilled her. All the houses had been equipped by the same installation team, a subcontracted group from Technova that had ceased operations months before the deaths. In Evelyn's report, there was the name of a technician who was at her home in August 2017, Daniel Reese. At first, he seemed like an ordinary employee, but Rachel realized his record had disappeared from the company's systems shortly after the crime. No information, no address, nothing. It was as if he'd never existed. It was then that Rachel realized the story was much bigger than a simple murder, and perhaps Evelyn hadn't just been a victim. Perhaps she'd discovered something she shouldn't have. Over the next few days, Rachel began receiving strange messages in her personal email with cryptic phrases and broken links. One of them read, "Don't look for what isn't being shown." She knew it was a warning, but at the same time an invitation, a psychological game. And the more she tried to understand, the more she realized she was being led towards something, as if someone wanted her to find the right path but at the same time controlled the pace. It was a suffocating sensation, as if she were walking inside a house with all the lights on, but without knowing where the sound was coming from. Rachel began to realize she wasn't just an investigator on this case, she was also a cog in something being observed, and the detail that haunted her most was precisely the one Evelyn had written before her death. "He's inside." Rachel repeated this phrase in her mind, trying to figure out if inside meant the system, the house, or something much more personal. And perhaps, deep down, she already knew the answer was much closer than she cared to admit. Rachel spent the next 2 weeks trying to gather enough evidence to convince the department that the deaths were connected, but the more she talked, the less they took her seriously. In meetings, her colleagues' tone changed. Snickers, quick glances, weary expressions. One even said, "You've been watching too many movies, Collins." Her boss, Lieutenant Harris, was even more blunt. "You need to stop wasting time with conspiracy theories. This is a regular homicide. No break-in, no robbery, no leads. Close the case." But Rachel couldn't. Something in her screamed that there was much more to it, something that escaped the eyes of others. And deep down, she knew the reason the case was being hushed up wasn't a lack of evidence. It was fear. At home, things also began to get complicated. Her 16-year-old daughter, Chloe, barely spoke to her mother. She said she was obsessed, that she only thought about work, that she was never there. And Rachel, trying to justify herself, always said the same thing. "I'm trying to stop anyone else from dying." But Chloe wouldn't listen. The two began to drift apart, and that familiar emptiness only increased the feeling of isolation. Rachel slept little, ate poorly, and spent hours in front of the computer, redoing reports she'd already memorized. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Evelyn's face, the fixed gaze, the immobile body, the too clean room. One day, exhausted, Rachel took the case to the county prosecutor. She asked for permission to reopen previous investigations under the same pattern. He listened silently and in the end simply said, "Rachel, stop. These things don't work for those who insist." The way he said it made her shiver. There was a warning tone, almost personal, and in that moment, she realized she was alone. No superior would support her. No colleague would risk their careers for a theory without solid evidence. So she did what she did best. She followed her instincts. Rachel returned to Evelyn's crime scene. She entered alone, without authorization, and stood there silently, trying to feel what the victim had felt. It was a technique she'd used for years, walking through the house, imagining the moment of the attack, the split-second decisions. Only this time it was different. The house felt alive, almost hostile. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow denser. In the office, the same computer that forensics had sealed suddenly blinked, as if it had turned on by itself. The screen showed a single new file, named logfinal.txt. Rachel took a deep breath and clicked. The file was empty, completely blank. But when she increased the contrast, she noticed something almost invisible, a hidden line of code, hidden between spaces. It was an IP address, and curiously, it was the same one that appeared in the other cases. She printed out the report and took it to the technical department. The analyst looked at the paper, shook his head and said, "This doesn't make sense. It's like someone created a trail for you to follow." That sentence stuck in her mind for the rest of the day, because it made sense. It was as if the killer wanted to be found, but only by her, as if this was all a game. Rachel took the new report to Harris, trying to show that there was a real pattern, a repeating digital signature in the victim's systems. He barely glanced at the papers. "You're starting to sound like those women, Collins. Obsessed with ghosts." The sentence felt like a slap. Rachel replied firmly that the job of the police was to chase ghosts until they were proven not to exist. Harris stood up, tired, and concluded, "Enough, close this case before your career ends with it." That was the last straw. Rachel left the room, her heart pounding, a mixture of anger and frustration. She knew that from then on she would have no one to support her, and in a way that freed her, because if the system didn't believe her, then there were no rules. That night, back home, she opened her laptop and began tracking the IP address herself. She discovered that the server was linked to a private security network, a Seattle-based company, name Technova, the same one Evelyn worked at. Rachel stared at the monitor, her hands trembling on the keyboard. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a circle closing. She wrote down every detail, saved it to a flash drive and put it in a locked drawer. She didn't yet know what she was up against, but she was certain of one thing. Someone inside that company was cleaning up their tracks, and anyone who tried to expose it would end up dead. The next morning, Harris called Rachel into his office. He said he had received an anonymous complaint against her, accusing her of unauthorized access to classified systems. She tried to defend herself, but he coldly interrupted, "You are suspended until further notice." Rachel left the building with a sinking feeling in her stomach. There was no doubt someone was trying to silence her. She drove aimlessly for hours until she parked in front of Evelyn's house again. She sat in the car, watching the reflection of the exterior cameras which now belonged to the police, and in that moment, a terrible thought crossed her mind. What if the problem wasn't what the cameras showed, but what they should never show? Rachel spent the entire night staring at her laptop monitor, her eyes burning with exhaustion and anger. The suspension was the clearest possible message. They were trying to silence her, but if they thought she would back down, they were wrong. By then, Rachel had already lost sleep, patience, and much of her trust in the system she swore to serve. Now what was driving her was something more personal, an almost physical need to prove she wasn't crazy, that Evelyn hadn't died for nothing, that behind it all lay a plan, a mastermind, someone who believed themselves untouchable. So, alone, without her badge, and without the backing of the department, she decided to continue. Only this time she would do it in silence. He grabbed the saved reports, plugged the flash drive into his computer, and began tracking every trace of code left in the victim's files. The IP address that appeared in every case led to a server that changed location every 3 days. It was a nomadic server, a pattern too sophisticated for ordinary hackers. But Rachel was good and stubborn. Using an old technique he learned in his early years of cyber research, he managed to intercept one of the automatic redirects and for a few seconds had access to the destination server. When he saw the name Technova Central Cloud, Seattle, WA, his heart skipped a beat. She'd been right all along. From there, he began to piece together the puzzle. He connected the dates of death with Technova's security software updates and realized that all the victims had received the same update just days before their deaths. A line of code that seemed harmless at first glance, but when analyzed more closely, created an invisible vulnerability, a type of remote access with full permission. That was it. Someone inside the company was using its own security system to spy on customers, and the women who discovered the scheme were being eliminated one by one. Rachel rose from her chair, taking a deep breath. Everything fell into place, but the most important thing was still missing: evidence. She needed to access Technova's main server and download the original records before they were deleted. But doing so meant crossing a line of no return. It would be trespassing, AICTE, federal crime, and if she were caught, she wouldn't just lose her job, she'd lose everything. But at that point, she saw no alternative. She picked up her cell phone and called an old FBI contact, Agent Richard Doyle, a discreet man, but one who owed her a favor from a kidnapping case solved years ago. Rachel didn't tell him everything, simply asked for help getting temporary access to a suspicious server. He hesitated, but eventually relented. With authorization in hand, Rachel prepared the attack. She created a script to bypass the firewall and entered Technova's network. The clock read 3:17 a.m. when the screen displayed the first folders, hundreds of them, some with technical names, others encrypted. And then one caught her eye: Watcher's log. Upon opening it, he found thousands of recordings, with usernames and locations of homes across the country. His blood ran cold. These weren't public recordings. They were videos from inside homes, filmed without consent. People sleeping, bathing, eating dinner, ordinary faces, entire families, and amidst so many names, there it was: Evelyn Marsh. Rachel began to tremble. She clicked on her file. The recording showed Evelyn alive, 3 days before her death, sitting in the living room, staring intently into one of the cameras, as if she knew she was being watched. The video ended abruptly, with a digital noise and the image frozen on her face, half scared, half defiant. Rachel slammed her laptop shut, her heart racing. She needed to get out of there. She needed to think. The next day she began receiving anonymous messages, first emails with no return address, with short sentences: "You've entered where you shouldn't have." Then silent calls, always at the same time. That night, she realized someone had tampered with her mailbox, though nothing had been taken. It was the kind of warning she was familiar with, discreet but clear, the kind of message that said, "We know where you are." Still, Rachel pressed on. With each discovery, the risk increased, but now she wasn't motivated solely by the truth. It was personal. Evelyn had somehow left that trail for someone to follow, and Rachel believed it was that person. She began to wonder if the killer knew this too, if he was watching her every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. And the worst part was, deep down, she felt he did. Sometimes when she got home, she swore she saw a light blinking where it shouldn't. Her computer would turn on by itself. Her voice assistant would respond without being summoned. Small details that could be technical glitches or signs that she was no longer alone. The nights grew long. Rachel slept little, her laptop open and a gun on the nightstand. The line between research and survival began to blur. He knew he needed to share what he'd discovered, but he didn't know who to trust. Technova had contracts with the government, the police, and private companies. He was an invisible enemy with too much power. And all the while Evelyn's words kept coming back to her: "He's in." The next morning, while reviewing the downloaded recordings, she found something that made her stomach churn. Among the recent recordings, there was a new folder dated that same day. Name: RC Home Feed. Rachel clicked on it. It was her own living room, filmed from above, with her sitting at her laptop. The video was streaming in real time. She jumped up, pulled the power cord, and looked around, her heart pounding. Every corner, every shadow seemed to hide someone, but there was no one. It was then that she understood. This game wasn't about Evelyn anymore. Now, she was the new one being watched. And what she discovered that early morning was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that might have already begun before she realized it. Rachel was no longer the same person who had first entered that house. The deep circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw, her shallow breathing, everything betrayed the weight of walking alone inside an invisible labyrinth. She had evidence, she had connections, she had clues that could bring down a tech giant, but she was paying a heavy price. With each passing day, she grew more isolated. The few friends who still answered her calls urged her to drop the case, saying she was going too far, and Chloe, her daughter, barely exchanged 2 words with her. She spent her days locked in her room, angry at her mother, at school, at everything. Rachel tried to reach out, but was always repelled with harsh words, and this destroyed her inside. It was as if her personal life was being sucked into the same web that devoured Evelyn. The veiled threats began to intensify. They weren't just silent emails or phone calls anymore. One day, Rachel returned from the grocery store to find her laptop facing the door, as if someone had been there while she was gone. Another day, her car alarm went off by itself in the middle of the night. Small signs, but enough to fray anyone's nerves. She began sleeping with her service pistol within reach, checking doors and windows repeatedly before bed. She knew this was precisely the goal of whoever was behind it, to leave her tired, insecure, vulnerable. The worst part was feeling like she was losing Chloe. In Rachel's mind, everything made sense. Every downloaded file, every tracking, every sleepless night was to protect people like Evelyn and protect her own daughter. But Chloe didn't see it that way. To her mother was turning into a stranger obsessed with theories and incomprehensible codes. She started leaving the house more, not responding to messages, not saying where she was going. Rachel tried to control her, tried to insist, but ended up arguing. And deep down she felt a fear she didn't have the courage to confess out loud that her daughter was becoming a target. This idea didn't come out of nowhere. One night, while reviewing Technova's server logs, Rachel came across a username that made her heart race mychloe.rc. It was a newly created profile, authorized to access the same folders that contained the victim's videos. She clicked on it, expecting to find an error, but it was all there. The location associated with the account was Chloe's school. Rachel closed her laptop and stood still, her hands sweating. She didn't tell her daughter, but she knew it was no coincidence. Physical exhaustion began to turn into emotional distress. Rachel was no longer eating properly, unable to concentrate on simple tasks. Everything revolved around the case. At work, she no longer had credibility. At home, she no longer had peace. And yet, she wouldn't stop. There was something inside her, perhaps pride, perhaps guilt, that wouldn't let her give up. Because deep down, she felt Evelyn had left a path for her to follow, a kind of silent mission. And the further she followed, the more she realized she wasn't just investigating a killer. She was investigating a network, a system, something much larger, operating in the shadows. Every night, Rachel wondered if she was reaching a point of no return. She knew this was what Evelyn was experiencing. She knew this was the state a victim reaches before the end, when there's no one left to call for help, when warnings don't work, when fear stops being an alarm and becomes routine. And the question that kept gnawing at her mind was there still time to escape? Or was it already too late? And she, like Evelyn, was being led to a fate she didn't choose. Rachel looked into her daughter's room that night and for the first time felt something was off. She couldn't explain it. It was an instinct, the same one that made her see patterns in crimes no one else saw. There was a different energy in the air, a tension she couldn't quite name. And without realizing it, she herself was about to experience the moment that would make this investigation personal in a way she never imagined. It first appeared in a line of code, a loose name, almost a programmer's nickname, Spectre, a ghost, an identifier within Technova's system that at first glance seemed like just another technical access, but which Rachel realized was constant, silent, and methodical. In every intrusion log, in every untraceable crime, there it was, infiltrated like a shadow, unseen, yet leaving small digital signatures as if to be noticed. At first, Rachel thought it was a team, an entire group operating under the same code name, but the more I investigated, the more I realized something even more disturbing. The intrusion style, the timing, the commands entered, even the typos. Everything pointed to a single person, a man. She began piecing together fragments of profiles, IP traces, anonymous server purchases, encrypted payments, and the portrait that emerged was unsettling. Spectre was a former Technova employee, a digital security expert named Marcus Hale, fired 3 years earlier after an internal incident that was hushed up. Officially, he had been terminated for violating privacy protocols, but Rachel discovered the story was much dirtier. Marcus had created code capable of remotely accessing any company surveillance system under the pretense of testing vulnerabilities. The problem is, he never disabled this function. Teknova turned a blind eye, choosing to cover it up, and Marcus disappeared, literally. No address, no recent photos, no activity recorded since. Rachel managed to find some of his former colleagues, people who worked on the same floor. They all described Marcus the same way. A quiet, overly polite guy, the kind who rarely smiles and observes a lot. He always wore the same clothes, grey shirt, dark pants, plain sneakers, and went unnoticed, but he was brilliant with codes. One of them even said he didn't need to break into the systems, he felt how to get in. The kind of genius who, when he crosses the line between ethics and power, becomes a ticking time bomb. What Rachel discovered next seemed like something out of a nightmare. Marcus not only used the code he created to hack into surveillance systems, but also monitored his victims for weeks before making his move. He didn't choose randomly. He observed, studied, and waited for each victim to be emotionally vulnerable. These were single women, with a history of internal complaints against the company, often connected to technology. He infiltrated their cameras, observed their routines, knew what they ate, what time they slept, who visited them. When he was ready, he simply disappeared with the images, as if to prove that the control they believed they had was an illusion. Rachel looked at the dossier she was putting together and felt something stronger than anger. It was revulsion. Marcus was no ordinary hacker. He was methodical, cold, almost clinical in his cruelty. The messages left on hacked systems were always the same. Short fragments of sentences, unsigned but with the same writing style. One of them, found on Evelyn's server, read, "You trusted me to protect you." That phrase echoed in Rachel's head over and over. The killer wanted to be recognized. He wanted someone to see the twisted art he saw in his own monstrosity. Little by little, Spectre's psychological profile began to take shape. An invisible, ordinary man who blended into the crowd. Someone who could be sitting next to you on the subway or having coffee at the same bakery without you noticing. This banality made him all the more dangerous. Rachel imagined his face and felt chills, because the more she thought, the more she realized that anyone could be Marcus Hale. And perhaps that was precisely his intention, to erase his own identity until he became part of the system. One early morning, Rachel was reviewing Teknova's encrypted files when an alert flashed on the screen. A remote access notification coming from the same server she'd been tracking. The IP address was identical to Spectre's. Before she could react, a window opened on the monitor, by itself. It was a live feed, a blurry image of a dark room. The camera shook slightly, and for a few seconds, a figure appeared, a man with his face partially obscured by shadows, staring directly into the lens. He said nothing, typed nothing. He simply stood there, motionless, watching. Then the screen went blank, and a sentence appeared in white letters on a black background. "Now you understand." Rachel froze. This wasn't a virus. It was a message, a personal warning. Spectre knew she was hunting him, and now the tables had turned. For a moment she considered stopping, closing everything down, handing over the evidence, and leaving the country with her daughter. But she couldn't, because in that blurry look on the recording, there was something she recognized, an unbearable calm, the same one she'd seen in Evelyn's photos, in the other victims' records. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and who was in no rush. In the following days, Rachel tried to trace the access again, but there was no signal. Spectre was gone. No trail, no new logins. It was as if he'd left that apparition only to remind her that he was always one step ahead. And somehow, that absence frightened her even more than the contact itself, because now every time she opened her laptop, every time she turned on a light, she wondered, how far could Spectre be seeing? And perhaps, without realizing it, Rachel had already passed the point where she was the one observing. Because in the shadows of this silent game between hunter and predator, there always comes a moment when the roles begin to reverse, and the line between the pursuer and the watched begins to blur. Rachel no longer knew what rest was. Hours drifted between files, cold coffee, and the constant hum of her computer. Research, which had once felt like work, was now an extension of her own body, an addiction. And amidst this silent chaos, something happened that shattered any remaining sense of control. It all started one Saturday afternoon when Chloe didn't come home from school. At first, Rachel tried to convince herself it was just a delay. She sent a text, then another, then called. No response. Time passed, and her nervousness gave way to a fear she hadn't felt since the early days of the Evelyn case. She got in her car and began driving home from school, checking every corner, every bus stop. No sign of her daughter. Her breath became shallow, her chest tight. When she arrived at school, she found the gates closed, but she saw the security guard. He recognized Rachel and said Chloe had left as usual at 4 p.m. She was on her phone, seemed distracted. She got into a black car, but I assumed it was a family member. That black car. Rachel felt her blood run cold. She asked to see the school's cameras, but the system was under maintenance. The security guard said the files had been corrupted since the beginning of the week. The same pattern, the same failure, the same excuses she'd heard at every previous crime scene. She got back in the car and stood there for a few minutes, trying to reason, trying not to break down. She called the department, asked for help, explained the history, the risk, the connection to Spectre. But the response was cold and bureaucratic. Rachel, we can't open an investigation without proof of kidnapping. Your daughter is a minor. She could be with friends. Wait 24 hours. 24 hours. The phrase echoed in her head like a sentence. Rachel hung up and stared into space. Then she started the car and sped off aimlessly. At every stoplight, she imagined Chloe trying to call for help. Imagined the girl crying, locked somewhere, her face illuminated by a computer screen, and it drove her crazy. She went back home and rummaged through everything, searching for some sign. And then, in her email, there was a new message. No sender, no title, just a video attachment. Rachel clicked without thinking. The screen went black. For a few seconds, and then a picture of a bedroom appeared. The frame was from above, like a security camera. A bed, a crumpled sheet, a figure lying down. The camera slowly zoomed in. It was Chloe, sleeping, alive, breathing. But the detail that made Rachel almost vomit in despair was the angle. That footage had been taken inside her house, Chloe's room. The walls, the lamp, the same blue pillow. She dropped her laptop, ran down the hallway, and opened the door to her daughter's empty bedroom. The sound of her breathing echoed throughout the house. She picked up the phone and called the FBI, old colleagues, any contacts she still had. Most didn't answer. Those who did said they would see what they could do. Rachel knew she was alone, and she knew Spectre was doing what he always did, turning his victims into part of his own story. She spent the night awake, reviewing the video frame by frame. She needed some clue, a shadow, a reflection, anything, and she found it. In the lower right corner of the image, reflected in the mirror, was something that looked like a symbol, a logo she recognized immediately. Technova, the same uniform worn by the company's technicians. That detail confirmed what she already knew but didn't want to believe. Chloe's kidnapping wasn't an isolated act. It wasn't personal revenge. It was part of a pattern. Spectre was sending a message. Now it's your turn to feel. Rachel began digging through Technova's installation records. She found the name of the technician who had worked on her home 2 years earlier, Daniel Reese, the same name that appeared in Evelyn's home records. This couldn't be a coincidence. She wrote down the address and, without thinking twice, drove there. It was an old repair shop on the outskirts of town, with faded signs and broken cameras. No one lived there. But inside, she found boxes of electronic parts, burned-out hard drives, Technova manuals, and, in a corner, a badge with Marcus Hale's photo. Rachel felt her legs weaken. This was no ordinary hiding place. It was a waypoint, a place used to cover tracks. She felt like she was getting too close. She began to hear noises coming from the back of the workshop, a metallic, repetitive sound, like footsteps. She drew her gun and followed slowly, her eyes fixed on the gloom, but she found no one. Only a blinking monitor with a chat window open. The words began to appear, one by one. Now, do you understand how much it hurts to lose someone? Rachel froze. She wanted to scream, wanted to break everything, but she stood still, her fingers trembling on the trigger. No answer came, because there was nothing to say. Spectre knew exactly how to attack her. He'd taken what she loved most, just as he'd taken Evelyn, and now he wanted to watch her collapse up close. The monitor flashed again. Another message. Pain is the purest code. Rachel slammed the computer shut and stormed out, her heart pounding like a hammer. In that moment, something shifted. She wasn't just the investigator anymore. She was the victim, and she knew that somehow Spectre was watching her every step, waiting to see what she would do next. But what he didn't know, or maybe he did, is that Rachel wasn't Evelyn. She was still alive, and she was ready to go all the way. That night back at home, the silence was unbearable. The lamp in her daughter's room was still on. Cameras flashed as if nothing had happened. But Rachel knew that from that moment on, there was no going back. Because for the first time she felt firsthand what Evelyn meant in that last sentence left on the table. He's in. And now, Rachel understood perfectly what that meant. Rachel spent the next 2 days in a state bordering on collapse. She barely ate, barely slept, and her face no longer concealed her exhaustion. Deep circles, reddened eyes, her hands shaking as if her entire body were about to give out. But her mind wouldn't stop. She knew she couldn't hand the case over to the police. She trusted no one. Everything she had, evidence, records, her daughter's video, the IP address, the names, was too dangerous to be in the wrong hands. And somehow, Rachel also knew Spectre was watching every move. She could feel it. The sensation was the same one Evelyn described in the emails, the constant, invisible presence of someone following every breath. So she did what she always did when fear threatened to overwhelm her. She turned to logic. She gathered maps, reports, log screenshots, IP, coordinates, and began to assemble what she called a human trail line, a physical map of Spectre's digital pattern. Each dot corresponded to a victim, a recording, a disappearance. And when she finished, the pattern was clear. All the trails converged on a 20-mile radius around Denver. That was where he operated. Not remotely, close enough to see his victims in person before attacking them. Rachel realized she needed to think like him, get inside the predator's mind. He spent hours reviewing the videos of Evelyn and the other women. He noticed details no one else saw, the distant sound of cars, the reflection of lights in windows, the kind of shadows that indicated the exact time of the recording. Little by little, he began to piece together a timeline. Evelyn died on a Thursday. The last image of her alive was recorded 3 days earlier at 9 p.m. Chloe's video showed the same frame, the same kind of light. Coincidence was impossible. This meant Spectre followed a pattern of time and space, like a ritual. The next morning, Rachel returned to Evelyn's home. The police had already finished their investigation, but she still had the house key. The place remained untouched, but there was something different in the air, a dense, almost palpable energy. She turned on her laptop and began scanning with signal tracking programs. After a few minutes, the system captured a hidden network point, something not found in any previous report. A hidden router. Rachel found it, behind a false panel, covered in dust but still working. She connected the cables and opened the directory. Inside, dozens of short videos. The files were short, almost all just a few seconds long, but their contents made her stomach churn. The images showed Evelyn sleeping, cooking, walking around the house, filmed from different angles, including inside the bathroom. Rachel pressed pause and remained motionless for long seconds. Each of those recordings had been made by someone who had been there inside the house installing hidden cameras, and the last video, the most recent, was the one she feared most. It showed Evelyn looking directly at the camera as if she had finally realized she was being watched. The next second, the screen cut to black. Rachel felt her palms sweat. This was what she needed. Physical, concrete proof of Spectre's access. But something nagged at her. The hidden server was still active, transmitting data in real time. This meant someone, somewhere, was still connected to that network. Rachel opened the monitoring window and saw the IP address. It was the same one that appeared in Chloe's video. The same symbol, the same pattern. She realized the system was mirroring the two recordings, as if one was observing the other. Evelyn and Chloe, past and present. With her heart racing, Rachel began to decipher the signal's digital path. It split into two sources, one within Technova itself, and another that appeared to come from a remote location in the Pine Creek Mountains about 40 kilometers away, and that was when everything clicked. Spectre's code wasn't just for covering his tracks. It created its own independent network that transmitted the videos to a hidden physical server. That's where all the recordings ended up. And if Evelyn's and Chloe's recordings were synchronized, it meant Chloe was alive. The thought hit her hard, like a punch to the chest. Rachel grabbed the map, marked the exact spot in Pine Creek, and began planning the search. She knew she couldn't count on anyone. She grabbed a flashlight, her vest, her revolver, and set off alone. In the car, the radio was off, the silence almost unbearable. The dark road seemed to stretch on forever, and every headlight in the rearview mirror made her heart race. She didn't know if she was heading for a rescue or a trap, but it no longer mattered. As she drove, she remembered the last time she'd spoken to Chloe. The harsh words, the pointless argument, the way her daughter had turned and left. It hammered away in her mind, as if the whole time had been a preparation for this moment. "Now do you understand how much it hurts to lose someone?" Spectre's words came back as a constant whisper. Rachel couldn't tell if it was hatred, despair, or fear, but one thing was certain: there was nothing left to lose. As the GPS indicated she was nearing her destination, the road began to narrow. The forest closed in around her. The air seemed heavier. Rachel parked the car a few meters from an old service road and continued on foot. In the middle of the woods, a metallic glint reflected the beam of her flashlight, a fence with high-tension wires, and behind it, a half-buried concrete structure like a bunker. She approached, and her phone vibrated in her pocket. A notification appeared on the screen. It was a live feed. The thumbnail showed Chloe's face. Rachel froze, and it was there, standing in the middle of the woods, her heart pounding, that she realized that everything she'd experienced up until that moment, all the clues, the messages, the videos, had been leading up to this very point. But what she didn't yet know, and what she was about to discover, was how much Spectre had planned this encounter long before she began searching. Rachel stopped before the fence, her heart hammering in her chest like a war drum. The early morning chill bit her skin, but she barely felt it. Her focus was elsewhere now, the bunker in front of her, the image of her daughter on her phone screen, and the suffocating feeling that every step she took to get there was part of a script written by someone else. She took a deep breath and tried to think clearly. She observed the structure from afar, calculating entry routes. No guards, no apparent movement, but there were cameras. Small, hidden, rotating slowly. She knew what that meant. Spectre was watching everything. Rachel turned off her phone, tucked it into her jacket, and crouched low to the ground. A few feet from the fence, she found a damaged section where the wires were cut, a deliberate access point. "He wants me in," she thought, and she did. She walked slowly, holding her breath, until she reached a metal entrance. The padlock was unlocked. She pushed the door open carefully and was greeted by a narrow, cold hallway lit by flickering emergency lights. The smell of damp and rusty iron filled the air. Her footsteps echoed off the walls as she advanced, gun in hand, trying to control her. Panic. The bunker was like a maze. Cables everywhere, old monitors stacked high, servers humming constantly. On one monitor, images flickered between houses, bedrooms, hallways, people sleeping. There were dozens of videos, hundreds. The horror took shape. This was an observation center. Each screen was a window into the life of someone who believed they were safe. Rachel walked to the main panel and began typing. The files were protected by layers of security, but she knew the code. It was the same pattern Evelyn used, and within seconds, she was able to open the central directory. There were all the names: Evelyn Marsh, Sandra Lee, Brooke Olson, dozens of victims listed as terminated projects, and at the top of the list, a new name, Chloe Collins. Status: active. Rachel felt her stomach churn. She clicked on the file. The screen filled with the image of Chloe, tied to a chair, in a dark room lit only by a monitor displaying Rachel's face. The recording was recent, minutes earlier. Spectre's voice rang out through the speakers, calm and clear, unhurried. "It's curious, Detective. You spent months stalking me, but you never realized that, in fact, you always walked where I wanted you to be. Evelyn tried the same thing, remember? She thought she could expose the system. And now you're inside it, too." Rachel looked around, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice. The speakers reverberated in every corner, making it impossible to determine its origin. "Where is she?" screamed, but the voice only laughed, a short, almost mocking laugh. "She's where you've been all these months, watched." Tension rose like a lump in her throat. Rachel began disconnecting cables, turning off monitors, anything that might interfere with the signal. But the system reacted. The lights flickered, the screens rebooted, and a new image appeared. This time, it was her, filmed in real time, inside the bunker. Panic hit her like a wave. Spectre wasn't just watching, he was controlling everything, manipulating the environment in real time. Rachel tried to track the signal's origin, but the server automatically redirected it, a digital maze with no way out. Each hacking attempt generated a message on the screen. "Stop fighting, look around." She hesitated for a second, then did as the message said. She looked around and realized the bunker's cameras were trained directly on her, recording every move. The entire place was a trap, a stage set for the final confrontation. Desperate, Rachel began searching for an alternative exit. She found a narrow staircase leading to an upper floor and hurried up, stumbling on the metal steps. The sound of her own heart drowned out everything. When she reached the top, she found a smaller room filled with boxes of equipment, and in the center, a single chair facing a panel of monitors. The chair slowly turned, revealing a face. The man staring back at her was surprisingly ordinary. Plain features, short hair, a cold gaze. Marcus Hale, the K, face behind the name Spectre. He smiled with a calmness that seemed rehearsed. "I knew you would come, you all do, it's predictable. You think you control technology, but technology controls you." Rachel raised her gun, her hands shaking, her eyes fixed on him. "Where's my daughter?" she asked hoarsely. Marcus jerked his chin toward the central monitor. The image showed Chloe in a brightly lit room now, sitting up, breathing, but clearly sedated. "She's safe, for now. You have something I want." Rachel tried to keep her aim steady. "What do you want, you bastard?" He stood slowly, raising his hands as if threatening. "I want the code, Rachel. The code Evelyn hid. She left it for you." She frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" He stepped forward, his eyes shining. "The Spectre folder, it wasn't mine, it was hers. She created the prototype, and I perfected it. She tried to warn you, but you took too long to understand. Now the code is on your computer, and you didn't even realize it." Rachel felt the ground disappear for a second. The pieces began to fall into place in a painful way. Evelyn wasn't just running from Marcus. She was part of the creation. And Rachel, unknowingly, had inherited the data everyone wanted. Everything she'd thought about the case was about to crumble. "You're lying," she said, but her voice was weak. Marcus laughed lightly. "No, Rachel, you're part of this now. The system doesn't need me anymore. It needs you." The lights began to flicker again, the sound of the servers rising in pitch like a growing hum. Rachel took a step back, gun still raised, but the ground vibrated. The system was crashing, rebooting. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "Choose, Rachel. Save your daughter or save the world." And before she could react, the monitor behind him changed. Chloe's image flickered, alive, crying, and then went black. Rachel screamed her daughter's name and fired. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the bunker, but when she opened her eyes, Marcus was gone. The chair spun on its own, the monitor showed only static, and in that instant, she understood. He had never been physically there. It was all projection, all remote control, and as the echo of the gunshot faded into the hallway, Rachel realized she was completely alone, again, within the system that promised safety, but was now her prison. And it was there, amidst the smoke and silence, that something on the panel blinked again. A new file was created automatically before her eyes. Name RC final log. And for some reason, Rachel knew that the contents of that file would change everything she had believed until now, including who was really controlling the game. Rachel stood motionless for a few seconds before that panel illuminated by the cold glow of the monitors. The file RC final log pulsed on the screen like a digital heartbeat, begging to be opened. But she hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this was another Spectre game, another step into a maze with no exit. But she had no choice. She pressed enter. The screen blinked twice, and then a mosaic of videos opened, not just of her, not just of Chloe, but of dozens, perhaps hundreds of people, men, women, children, all filmed inside their own homes. sleeping, crying, talking to themselves, a massive spy network powered by the very security devices that promised protection. It was the final proof that Spectre was not just a criminal. He had turned Technova into a parallel surveillance system. Among the videos, one caught Rachel's attention. It was a recording of Evelyn Marsh, days before her death, sitting at her computer, with dark circles under her eyes and a weary face. She spoke directly to the camera, as if recording a warning. "If anyone finds this, know that he is not a man, he is a system. He is in all of us. I created the breach, but he became something bigger. I tried to stop him, but now it's too late." The image froze on Evelyn's face. Her gaze filled with panic. Rachel swallowed hard. Spectre's voice echoed through the speakers again, but this time there was no irony. It was calm, almost serene. "See now, Rachel. It's not just me. I'm just a face, a name for the system to have an identity. You need monsters to understand monsters, but this here..." The monitors began to alternate between images from public cameras, home cameras, cell phone cameras. "This here isn't a crime. It's the future you built." Rachel clenched her fists, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Where is my daughter?" The voice answered unhurriedly. "Your daughter is a catalyst. She's not a victim like the others. She's here because you needed to understand. You needed to feel. Now finally, you know what Evelyn knew." With each word, Rachel's anger grew. She began disconnecting cables, taking down servers, ripping out hard drives, but the system seemed to regenerate itself. Every monitor she turned off came back on. Every deleted file recreated itself. It was at that moment that a message appeared right in the center of the screen. In large letters, "You cannot destroy what is already inside." Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine. The phrase echoed the note Evelyn left before she died. The same warning, the same cycle. Then a new window opened. It was Chloe, alive in a white room, sitting on the floor, scared but conscious. Behind her, a metal door. The image flickered slightly, as if transmitted from a handheld device. Rachel looked closer to the screen, trying to make out something in the background, some detail that might indicate her location. There was a faded sign on the wall, only 3 letters visible. PCK, Pine Creek. She was there, in the complex, just a few feet away. Rachel felt her entire body shiver. This was proof that Spectre was in control, but it was also the clue she needed. She grabbed her vest, adjusted her weapon, and looked at the monitors as if speaking directly to him. "I'm coming to get you," she said, quietly. No response, just the hum of the servers. She began walking through the bunker, following the feeling that Chloe was close. Each door she opened led to increasingly narrow corridors filled with cables and blinking machines. The air grew colder, denser. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of an industrial fan. Each step increased the tension. At any moment, she expected to see Marcus Hale or someone waiting, but there was no one, only machines. At the end of the hallway, a door unlike any other, made of steel with a small reinforced window. Rachel approached slowly and peered inside. For a second, she thought her heart would stop. Chloe was there, sitting on the floor, hugging her knees, her eyes red from crying. Seeing her mother on the other side of the glass, she looked up in surprise and began banging on the glass. Rachel tried to open it, but the door was electronically locked. She looked around, searching for a control panel. As she ran down the hallway, a new sound echoed through the speakers. It was Spectre's voice again, but closer now, almost whispering. "You found her. But she's not your daughter anymore, Rachel. She saw, she knows, she understands." Rachel stopped, trying to control her breathing. "What did you do to her?" she screamed. Silence, then just one sentence. "You didn't come to rescue her. You came to take her place." The lights began to flicker. An alarm sounded somewhere in the complex. Rachel ran back to the door, trying to break the security panel with the butt of her gun. Chloe screamed on the other side. The feeling was suffocating, and for the first time since it all began, Rachel didn't know if she was about to rescue her daughter or fall into the final trap Spectre had set for her. Rachel pounded on the glass so hard her hands began to bleed, but she didn't stop. She screamed her daughter's name like someone trying to tear a nightmare from her throat. Chloe cried on the other side, her words coming out in sobs, but the sound was too muffled to make out what she was saying. The electronic panel next to the door flashed red, blocked, and Rachel, desperate, aimed the gun and fired. The shot ricocheted, echoing through the metal hallway, and for a moment, everything was silent. Smoke spread through the heavy air, mingled with the smell of iron and fear. With trembling hands, Rachel pulled the cables from the panel until she found the power core. She remembered her old training sessions, the days when she still believed everything had a protocol. Controlled breathing, focused on the objective, but her reasoning gave way to emotion when she heard her daughter's voice again. A whisper, almost a plea. "Mom, get me out of here." That was enough. Rachel placed the gun against the security system and fired 2 more shots. The lights flickered, sparks flew from the panel, and with a snap, the lock was disengaged. She pushed the door open with her shoulder and entered the room. Chloe threw herself into her mother's arms, her thin body trembling, her face streaked with tears. Rachel hugged her tightly, saying nothing. For a few seconds, the whole world narrowed into that moment. Mother and daughter, alive, breathing, recognizing each other after so much fear. But the sense of relief was short-lived. A low sound rippled through the bunker, like a subterranean rumble. The red lights began to flash. Overhead, a digital sign lit up. Final protocol activated. Rachel looked around and saw the same symbol from Evelyn's recordings plastered on the walls, the Technova logo. The system was in self-destruct mode. She had minutes, maybe seconds, before everything collapsed. "Come on, Chloe. We need to get out of here." She grabbed her daughter's hand and ran down the hallway. The metallic sound of her footsteps mixed with the rumble of the machines shutting down. The doors closed automatically one by one, as if the bunker was swallowing itself. In the middle of her escape, Chloe tripped and fell. Rachel bent down to help, and that's when she realized. The girl's gaze was strange, empty, distant, as if she didn't recognize what was happening. "Daughter, look at me. We're going to get out of here, okay? Look at me." But Chloe just repeated, her voice trembling. "He said there's no way out." Rachel felt her body freeze. "Who said that, Chloe?" The girl hesitated for a moment and answered almost in a whisper, "The man with the cameras." Panic hit her like a fist. Rachel pulled her daughter away and kept running. But inside her head the phrase echoed like a mantra. The man with the cameras. Spectre was still there somehow, even though he wasn't physically present. Every flashing light, every sound in the hallway felt like his presence, watching, waiting. The stairs leading to the exit were just a few feet away when a voice came over the speakers. Calm, familiar, almost sweet. "Don't run, Rachel. You got what you wanted. It's all connected now. You two belong." Rachel ignored it, pushing the iron door open with all her might and stepping out into the open air. The bitter chill of dawn hit her like a punch. Outside, the still dark sky was beginning to take on shades of blue. She and Chloe collapsed onto the grass, panting, covered in dust. Behind them, the sound of underground explosions echoed like thunder. The ground vibrated, and a thick cloud of smoke rose from the forest, engulfing the bunker entrance. It was over. The bunker, the evidence, everything. Rachel looked at her daughter, who remained silent, hugging her knees. "It's over, my love, it's over." But deep inside her, doubt still throbbed. Chloe didn't seem relieved. Her distant gaze, fixed on some invisible point, unsettled her. "Daughter, it's okay now. You're with me." The girl slowly turned her face to her mother, and something in that look made Rachel regret her own words. Chloe smiled, a barely perceptible smile, and whispered, "He said you would come." Rachel took a step back, uncomprehending. "What?" Chloe repeated, looking straight into her mother's eyes. "He said you needed to see it." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine, and then her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out slowly, her hands trembling. The screen was cracked, but the content was clear. A new live broadcast. The thumbnail showed her and Chloe, sitting there, at that very moment. Rachel looked up and noticed for the first time something she hadn't noticed before. High in the trees, cameras, small, hidden, blinking, hundreds of them, staring at them, transmitting. The sound of Spectre's voice echoed one last time, this time soft, almost paternal. "What's recorded, Rachel, never disappears. You just think you've escaped." Rachel held her daughter's hand and fell silent. The cold wind blew, and the distant rumble of the bunker collapsing mingled with the sound of cameras spinning overhead. She looked at Chloe and tried to smile, but deep down she knew she hadn't won. None of them had, because somewhere in the shadows the system was still alive, and maybe, just maybe, the real game was just beginning. The sun was just beginning to rise, tinting the sky a pale orange as Rachel and Chloe walked along the dirt road, covered in ash and the distant sound of sirens echoing. They didn't say a word to each other. The bunker had been destroyed, but the silence that remained was almost more frightening than the sound of the explosions. Rachel glanced at her daughter every now and then, trying to find the same girl in her, the one who laughed at anything, the one who filled the house with music, the one who fought over trivial matters and then apologized with a tight hug. But that innocent look was gone. In its place was an uncomfortable serenity, a calm that seemed unlike a 16-year-old girl, and it tore Rachel apart inside. They were taken to a local police shelter, where they were given blankets, water, and a team of psychologists. Rachel answered every question the officers asked, but with every word she felt like she was being judged. An underground bunker, an invisible hacker, cameras in the trees. It was as if, once again, the system was trying to turn truth into paranoia. The difference was that now Rachel no longer needed anyone to believe her. She saw, she lived, and so did Chloe. Only, unlike her mother, her daughter seemed at peace. When one of the psychologists asked how she was, Chloe simply replied, "I understand." No one understood what she meant. Rachel didn't either. Over the next few days, Rachel tried to return to some semblance of a routine, but life didn't fit. Chloe's room looked the same, but there was a strangeness about it, as if everything had been returned but not in the same form. The house's security cameras had been removed, the computers turned off, and yet Rachel still felt as if she were being watched. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night, swearing she heard footsteps in the hallway. Other times she would see the monitor light turn on by itself, even though it wasn't connected to anything. She tried to convince herself it was just trauma, but her police instinct told her otherwise. Someone was still there watching. One morning, while making coffee, she heard Chloe in her room talking to herself. She walked to the door and stood still, listening. Her daughter's voice was low, measured, almost as if she were answering someone. "Yes, she doesn't understand yet," she said, "but she will." Rachel froze. She pushed the door open and Chloe turned calmly, smiling. "Hi, Mom." The room was empty, the laptop off, but Rachel was sure she'd heard another breath in there seconds before. She said nothing, just forced a smile and returned to the kitchen, trying to swallow her fear. In the days that followed, small details began to repeat themselves. Messages with no sender would appear in Rachel's email with a single sentence. The cycle continues. Sometimes the lights in the house would flash in sync with notifications on her phone, as if the entire environment were responding to her. It was the same pattern Evelyn described before she died, and the more Rachel tried to disconnect, the more she realized she was trapped in something beyond her control, a system that now had a consciousness of its own, and that perhaps had found its new gateway in Chloe. One night, Rachel woke up with a start to find her daughter sitting on the couch staring blankly into space. "Are you okay?" she asked. Chloe slowly turned her head and replied in a calm, almost sweet voice, "He's not bad, Mom. He just wants to be seen." Rachel's blood ran cold. "Who, Chloe?" The girl blinked slowly and replied, "Spectre." Rachel recoiled, unable to process it. The name she'd spent months hunting for, the man who'd destroyed so many lives, now came from her own daughter's mouth with a calmness that bordered on the absurd. Before she could say anything, Chloe added, "He said he'll stop when the world understands." And she turned her gaze back to the switched-off television, as if waiting for something to appear on the screen. Rachel stood there, watching her daughter, trying to decide if this was trauma or something much deeper, a contamination, some kind of invisible inheritance from the system. The next few days were a blur. The two rarely left the house. Rachel tried to keep her mind occupied, but it was impossible. Every noise, every shadow, every notification seemed like a reminder that the past was still there. Sometimes she'd see Chloe typing on the computer, with a concentration reminiscent of Evelyn in recent days. When she asked what she was doing, her daughter would just smile and say, "Working on a school project." Deep down, Rachel knew she would never sleep peacefully again. The bunker might have been destroyed, Spectre might be dead, but the system, that constant, invisible gaze, was still alive, now disguised as screens, sensors, and artificial voices. She looked at her daughter and felt a weight that mixed guilt and fear. Evelyn tried to warn her, Rachel tried to stop her, but perhaps no one could stop something that had been inside everyone from the beginning. That last night, sitting on her porch, gazing up at the cloud-filled sky, Rachel noticed the reflection of lights flickering on the street's power lines. A pattern, precise, repeating intervals, a binary sequence. She recognized it immediately. It was the same code Spectre had used, and before she could react, her phone vibrated with a new notification. A live feed. The image showed her and Chloe, inside their own house, seen from above. The caption read, "The world needs to see." Rachel stood there staring at the screen, breathless. The loop Evelyn had started was now complete, and deep down she understood there was no longer an inside or an outside. Because when the system learns to use human faces to survive, it never dies. It just changes its name. And in that moment, staring at the reflection of her own face on the screen, Rachel knew the story wasn't over. It was just changing narrators. That morning seemed quieter than all the others. Rachel sat on the living room floor, phone still in hand, her breath shaky. The screen flashed before her like a digital heart. The broadcast continued live, displaying its own image in real time. She and Chloe, there, in the same room, watched. Once again. The fear was no longer the same. Now it was mixed with a strange acceptance, as if a part of her finally understood what Evelyn meant. He's in. Rachel was no longer just an investigator trying to solve a case. She was part of the story, or maybe part of the system. The next few hours dragged by in a daze. Chloe slept on the couch, her face serene, almost peaceful, and Rachel couldn't take her eyes off her. As much as she wanted to believe it was over, she knew it was just a pause. The system could be physically destroyed, but it was too widespread, too infiltrated. Every person with a camera, every home with a voice assistant, every connected screen was an open door, and Spectre, or whatever he had become, was still there, no longer as a man but as a presence. An algorithm evolved from human fear itself. Over the next day, the press began reporting on the Pine Creek bunker explosion. Authorities spoke of an abandoned structure accident, naming no names, mentioning no victims. No trace of Marcus Hale was found. No digital records, no concrete evidence of Rachel's experience. Everything seemed carefully erased, wiped clean, as if nothing had happened. It was the same pattern. And once again, Rachel realized, the system wasn't just monitoring, it was controlling the narrative. She tried to return to work, but the police officially suspended her. The justification, emotional instability and improper involvement in unauthorized operations. In the internal report, her name was associated with digital obsession and persecutory delusions. It was the same fate as all those who got too close to the truth. Rachel gave up arguing. She took her daughter and moved to a small town in the countryside, far from the capital, where the internet connection was weak and cameras were rare. For a while, she managed to feign normality. She farmed, cooked, read old books. Sometimes she even smiled. But at night, when the silence grew too deep, Rachel felt the weight of the invisible gaze, the faint sound of static on the radio, the reflection of light on the window, the quick glow in the corner of the room, small signs that seemed to say, "I'm still here." She tried to ignore it, but Chloe didn't. The girl seemed calm, but she had changed. He spent hours on the computer connecting wires, writing code he didn't show to anyone. Rachel, afraid to press it, pretended not to notice. Until one day, passing by the room, she saw the screen on and recognized the symbol. That had haunted her for months, the same one that appeared in Evelyn's recordings, the redesigned Technova logo pulsing red. Rachel entered slowly, silently. Chloe turned her head, surprised but not scared. "Mom, I was just testing a few things," she said, with a too calm smile. Rachel walked over and put a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Daughter, what did you do?" The girl looked away, took a deep breath, and replied, "He doesn't want to hurt anyone anymore, Mom. He just wants to be heard. I can fix what you started." And in that moment, Rachel understood that nothing was over. Evelyn, Spectre, Technova, they were all part of the same cycle. And now, the next link was her own daughter. In the days that followed, Chloe began talking about rebuilding, about fixing the system. He used terms Rachel recognized but didn't want to hear. Her gaze was the same one he'd seen in Marcus, the same cold glare of someone who believed they'd found a truth greater than their own fear. And Rachel, lacking the courage to confront it, just watched. It was like seeing the beginning of something she herself had tried to destroy. One night, Chloe's computer was left on while she slept. Rachel walked over and saw a broadcast being set up. In the corner of the screen, the title, The Spectre Project Reborn. She tried to hang up, but the system wouldn't respond. The camera activated itself, and for the first time, Rachel saw her own reflection appear on the monitor. Tired, aged, but with the same look as Evelyn in the last video. The chat began to roll. Hundreds of messages from anonymous users watching, commenting, sharing. The world, once again, watching something it didn't understand. Rachel forcibly shut down the computer, pulling the power cord. The room plunged into darkness, and the silence that followed was almost deafening. She sat on the edge of the bed, her heart racing, trying to understand if it was still possible to break this cycle. Outside, the wind rustled the trees and a light flickered in the distance on a street lamp. A familiar blinking pattern, binary, the same sequence Evelyn recorded before she died. Rachel watched the rhythmic blinking until she realized the house lights began to follow suit. One by one, the electronic devices turned on again. The computer, the television, the router, all synchronized, like a single breathing organism. And then, on the laptop screen, a new message appeared. Thank you for keeping the system alive. Rachel didn't move a muscle. Tears streamed slowly down her face, not from fear but from a bitter realization. She understood there was no victory, no escape, no end. The system no longer needed Spectre, nor Evelyn, nor her. It had already spread, blended into the world, into habits, into routine. Now it was invisible, silent, eternal. Chloe appeared in the doorway, her gaze still calm. "Mom, he wants to talk to you." Rachel looked up, unable to react. "Who?" Chloe smiled slightly. "The one who's always been here." And at that moment all the lights in the house went out simultaneously, leaving only the glow of the screen illuminating their faces. In the corner, the Technova symbol blinked once more before disappearing, and the video, the final recording, ended exactly where it began, with a woman staring into the camera silent, the same look Evelyn had at the end, the same one Spectre left for the world. Because in the end, the system never wanted to hide the truth. It just wanted someone to keep telling the story. This story made you realize how much fear can hide in the most ordinary things, right? Somehow it awakened that strange feeling of being watched, of wondering what happens when the cameras go out. And that's exactly why it needed to be told. Now that same impact you felt can reach others, people who also love diving into real stories, full of mystery, twists, and truths that seem like fiction. The simple act of letting go, like, and press subscribe makes more. People find this story and feel the same chills you felt here. And since you've reached the end, comment on the word visible down here. Only those who understood the message behind this story will know the weight of this word. The next video is already appearing on the screen. And can I tell you something? It will leave you with the feeling that everything you've seen so far was just the beginning. Because some stories don't end when the video ends. They continue, watching us. And the next one, perhaps, is even closer than you imagine.